Looking back, I guess you could say my life with Carly was a slow-motion train wreck. 25 years we were married. I hit 50, she was closing in on it at 48. Zach and Emily, our kids, were already out building their own lives. From the outside, I'm sure we seemed like one of those couples who had it all figured out. But inside our four walls, it was a different story entirely. Before the kids arrived, Carly was an office manager at some small company. She enjoyed it, was damn good at it, but when Zach was born, she made the call to quit and stay home with the kids. At the time, it felt like the right thing to do. I was working full-time as an IT support manager. We figured we could manage on my salary with Carly focusing on the kids. I respected her decision, thought we were a team. And for a while, it worked out. Carly carried the load with the kids' school runs, homework help, the whole shebang. I made sure I showed her my appreciation even though I wasn't always there to pitch in as much as I wanted. But as the kids grew, the money situation got tighter. Raising two kids is no joke, and we were relying on a single income. Every unexpected bill, car repairs, school trips, even the annual back-to-school clothes shopping felt like climbing Everest. I picked up extra shifts whenever I could, pulling late nights and weekend work just to keep things afloat. I hated it. Some days I'd leave before the kids were awake and get home after they were already asleep. Carly pointed out I was missing out on their childhood, and she was right, but what was I supposed to do? We needed the money. Despite my efforts, Carly became more and more bitter. I think she felt trapped. She'd given up her career for the family, and with Zach and Emily getting older, she didn't have as much to focus on. She'd make these little digs about how other families seemed to have it all figured out while we were just barely scraping by. It stung. I was already feeling like a failure for not providing the life she wanted, and hearing it from her just made it worse. Then, things shifted in ways I couldn't ignore. Carly started paying a lot of attention to her appearance, regular hair appointments, new clothes she didn't need, makeup every single day even when she was just staying at home. She also started going out more, claiming she was meeting old friends or attending community events. I didn't question it at first. I thought maybe she was just trying to find something for herself, and I didn't want to be the guy who held her back. If she needed that time, I wanted to support her. But after a while, something felt off. She'd come home late, smelling like some fancy perfume I didn't recognize, and brush it off when I asked where she'd been. The breaking point came one night when she said she had a book club meeting. It was 8 p.m. and I remember thinking, who has a book club meeting this late? Something just didn't add up. For the first time in our marriage, I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed her. She left the house dressed up more than usual, which raised a red flag. I kept my distance, following her car across town until she parked at a coffee shop. I parked a good way off so she wouldn't see me, and I waited. About 10 minutes later, she went inside and sat down with some guy I didn't know. He was maybe in his mid-40s, a little younger than us, and they were laughing and talking like they were the only two people in the world. At first, I told myself it could be innocent. Maybe he was an old friend or someone from a volunteer group. But then they got up, walked out holding hands, and got into his car. I followed them to a hotel a few blocks away. They didn't even hesitate, they walked right in together. I sat in my car for what felt like forever, trying to make sense of what I just witnessed. Part of me wanted to go inside and confront them, but another part of me knew it was pointless. I'd seen enough. When I got home, I packed a bag and left a note on the kitchen counter. I know what you're doing. No point in denying it now. That's all I could muster before turning on my heel and driving to a friend's. Their couch was my bed for the night. The next day, the first thing I did was call a divorce lawyer. When I finally faced Carly, there wasn't even a flicker of surprise, let alone remorse. She just sat there, unnervingly composed, as if she'd been rehearsing this moment. When I laid it all out, the coffee shop rendezvous, the hotel, she simply nodded. I guess there's no point in lying, is there? She admitted. She then confessed that this Rick had been in the picture for nearly a year. Not just some fleeting indiscretion, apparently. This Rick fellow, it turned out, was rolling in it. Owned businesses, a mansion across town, and, in her estimation, possessed the uncanny ability to understand her in ways I supposedly couldn't. Those were her words, not mine. There were no apologies, no attempts to soften the blow. I wasn't happy, she stated, as if presenting a simple fact. Rick makes me feel appreciated. No tears, no begging for forgiveness, no sign of regret. It was as if she'd been patiently waiting for me to uncover her secret life so she could finally move on without any moral quandaries. She itemized her grievances like she was justifying a quarterly loss to the board of directors. Lonely, disconnected, unappreciated. And then the kicker, you've been so focused on work for years. I didn't think you even noticed me anymore. as if my dedication to providing for our family somehow excused her betrayal. I just stood there, absorbing her words, feeling a slow burn of anger ignite within me. 25 years of marriage traded in for a wealthier man, and she couldn't even pretend to feel bad about it. The only crack in her composure appeared when I finally said, "I'm filing for divorce." "Are you sure about that?" she asked, a slight tilt of her head suggesting a hint of surprise that I'd actually take decisive action. "I'm done," I replied, the words feeling heavier than I expected. "You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." She didn't argue, simply offering a detached, "All right, I guess this is for the best." It was so clinical, so calculated, like the next step in a meticulously planned campaign. Actually filing the paperwork turned out to be surprisingly straightforward. I suspect a part of me had mentally checked out of the marriage a long time ago, so once I had a concrete reason to leave, I didn't hesitate. The hardest part wasn't walking away from Carly, it was the looming conversation I had to have with Zach and Emily. They were adults, yes, but this wasn't some minor disagreement I could sweep under the rug. I knew the news would devastate them. What I hadn't fully anticipated was the distinct lack of support I'd receive from the two people I assumed would instinctively be on my side. I decided to speak with them separately, starting with Zach, figuring he'd be the more rational one. We met at his usual Greasy Spoon diner, the kind of place where the burgers drip with fat and the coffee tastes suspiciously like engine oil. He was already there, engrossed in his phone, when I arrived. I sat down, made some superficial small talk, and then just tore off the bandage. "I'm divorcing your mom," I blurted out. Zach's expression went blank for a beat. Then he slowly lowered his phone and asked, "Why?" "She's been having an affair," I said, trying to keep my voice level. I didn't want to sound like I was fishing for sympathy. I caught her with the guy, and she admitted to it when I confronted her. I honestly thought Zach would understand. Infidelity is a clear-cut issue, right? Instead, he leaned back in the booth and let out this exaggerated sigh, as if I'd just told him his favorite team had choked in the championship game. "Dad, come on," he said, his tone laced with exasperation. "Are you sure you're not overreacting? Maybe you guys just need some counseling or something." "Overreacting?" I repeated, incredulous. "She's been seeing this guy for almost a year. This isn't a misunderstanding, it's over." Zach remained unconvinced. "Yeah, but Mom's been a stay-at-home mom for years. Don't you think maybe she felt, I don't know, trapped, isolated? You've been working so much, maybe she just needed." "She needed to cheat on me?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "If she felt trapped or isolated, she could have talked to me. She didn't. She chose to sneak around behind my back." Zach simply shrugged, as if it were a minor inconvenience. "Maybe you shouldn't rush into a divorce," Zach had said. "You've been married for 25 years, man. That's gotta mean something, right?" I just stared at him, dumbfounded. Zach launched into this whole thing about how complicated a divorce would be, how I needed to think about the impact on the family. He never once acknowledged Carly's actions, never even hinted that he understood where I was coming from. By the time I left that diner, it was crystal clear, Zach wasn't on my side. I'd held out some hope that Emily would be different, but I was wrong there too. I told her everything at a park near her apartment, walked her through the whole mess. She didn't even flinch. "Okay," she said when I finished. "So, what are you going to do?" "I already filed the papers," I told her. She crossed her arms and frowned. "Isn't that a bit extreme? I mean, Mom messed up, sure, but are you really just throwing away your marriage like this?" "It wasn't a mess up, Emily. It was a choice," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "Forgetting an anniversary is a mistake. Saying something hurtful in the heat of an argument is a mistake. This was something completely different." Emily shook her head. "You don't get it. Mom sacrificed everything for us, her career, her freedom. She put her life on hold to raise you and Zach while you worked. Don't you think that took its toll?" "So, the answer was to cheat on me?" I interrupted, maybe a little too sharply. "Why is everyone acting like this is somehow my fault?" "No one's saying it's your fault, Dad," Emily shot back. "I'm just saying it's not black and white. People aren't perfect, Dad. Mom made a mistake, but that doesn't mean you should throw away 25 years. It was like talking to a brick wall." No matter what I said, Emily kept coming back to how much Carly had given up for the family, how I needed to consider the bigger picture. When I told her my decision wasn't up for discussion, she got defensive. "Well, if you've already made up your mind, don't expect me to take sides," she said. "I'm not asking you to take sides," I said, though I was starting to realize she already had. By the end of the conversation, I was exhausted. Zach and Emily weren't just unsupportive, they were actively dismissing what I was going through. It felt like they were more concerned with Carly's feelings than mine, like her betrayal was somehow justified because she'd been lonely or sacrificed too much. And the worst part? Carly didn't even seem to care. Over the next few weeks, things went from bad to worse. Zach and Emily started distancing themselves. They'd always been pretty good about calling or texting now and then, but now I was lucky if I heard from them once a month. When I tried to reach out, the conversations were short, strained. I could tell they were spending more time with Carly and Rick. I'd see pictures on Facebook, family dinners, birthday parties, holidays, and I wasn't in any of them. They didn't explicitly cut me out, but the message was clear: I wasn't part of the inner circle anymore. The final blow came a few months after the divorce was finalized. Emily called out of the blue to share some news. She was engaged. For a fleeting moment, I felt like I was part of her life again. My little girl was getting married, and she'd actually thought to call me. I congratulated her, my voice cracking a little as I told her how happy I was for her. But when I asked about the wedding, there was a pause on the line, and in that split second, I knew something was wrong. "Well, Mom and Rick will be there, and Rick will be walking me down the aisle," she said quietly, like that explained everything. I frowned, confused. "So, it'd be awkward if you came," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I went rigid. Awkward for whom, exactly? I wanted to shout the question, but the words just wouldn't come. My own daughter was telling me, plain as day, that my presence at her wedding was undesirable. It might ruffle feathers. Carly and Rick's feathers. The guy Carly had the affair with, the man who effectively detonated our family, was not only welcome but would be walking her down the aisle. And I, her own damn father, wasn't even invited. "Are you serious, Emily?" The question squeezed out, my throat constricting. "It's just, you know how things are," she stammered, sounding uncomfortable but not remotely apologetic. "It'll just be easier. For everyone." Easier for who, exactly? I wondered, but I bit my tongue. It sure as hell wasn't easier for me. I gripped the phone hard, sitting there trying to maintain some semblance of composure. "All right," I managed to say finally, because what else was there to say? That was it. I was officially uninvited to my daughter's wedding. A crushing weight settled on my chest, a hollowness that felt like a physical wound. And then, just when I thought the pain couldn't possibly deepen, Zach dropped his bomb a few months later. His justification was sickeningly similar. "Mom and Rick will both be there, Dad. It would be uncomfortable if you came. For everyone involved." Hearing it from him felt like a cold blade twisting in my gut. I'd always considered Zach to be the reasonable one, the one who would eventually see things from my perspective. But no, he'd made his choice too. Right then, it hit me like a punch. I hadn't just lost my wife in this mess, I'd lost my kids. Carly hadn't just cheated and run off with some richer guy. She'd also managed to pull Zach and Emily entirely into her camp and deliberately cut me out of their lives. It felt like she had won, like she had taken everything from me and left me stranded in the ruins of a life I had spent decades building. But I couldn't accept it. I couldn't just let it go. So, I kept reaching out, sending Zach and Emily texts, leaving voicemails, just trying to stay connected. "Hope you're doing well," I'd say, simple as that. Sometimes they'd respond with short, polite acknowledgments, often no more than a word or two. But more often than not, my messages went completely ignored. I remember one night, maybe 9 months or so after the divorce, when the loneliness hit me especially hard. The house was echoing with silence, and I hadn't had a meaningful conversation with anyone outside of work in days. On a sudden impulse, I dialed Zach's number. When he answered, I could hear the muffled sound of a TV playing in the background. "Hey, Zach," I said, trying to inject some cheer into my voice. "I was just thinking, maybe you and your fiancé could come over for dinner sometime this week? It's been a while, and I'd really love to catch up." There was a long, drawn-out pause on the other end of the line. Then he sighed heavily. "I'd like to, Dad, honestly, but we're just crazy busy right now. All the wedding planning, you know? Maybe some other time, huh?" I swallowed the tightness in my throat and forced a smile that he obviously couldn't see. "Sure, I get it. Another time." "Yeah, definitely another time," he said. "I'll call you when things settle down, Dad." He never did call. That was the moment the truth fully registered. I wasn't a priority in their lives anymore. I was just some obligation they would occasionally remember when it suited them. The ember of hope I had been stubbornly clinging to began to slowly die. I tried to tell myself it was for the best, that staying in a marriage where I was disrespected would have been far worse, but there was always this persistent, nagging voice in the back of my head questioning whether I had made the right choices. Should I have fought harder? Should I have swallowed my pride and endured it for the sake of holding the family together? The questions remained unanswered. Life simply moved on without me. I spent the next 8 years keeping a low profile, burying myself in my work. Honestly, it wasn't out of a deep-seated passion for my job, it was more about sheer survival. I was 50 years old, essentially starting from scratch, and I desperately needed something, anything, to keep me from completely falling apart. Work was the only thing I had left. My IT job wasn't exactly setting my soul on fire, but it was a steady paycheck and kept me occupied. Most days were spent buried in the usual tech trenches, troubleshooting network outages or untangling some coworkers' software snafu. The job didn't demand much in the way of emotional investment, and frankly, that suited me just fine at the time. Then Martin showed up. He was a relentless idea machine, the type who'd corner you by the coffee pot and launch into business proposals like he was auditioning for Shark Tank. One afternoon, he pulled me aside. "Ever considered striking out on your own, building something from the ground up?" he asked. Initially, I brushed it off with a laugh. "Martin, I'm not exactly known for my daring," I told him. But he wouldn't let it go. His idea was a cybersecurity consulting firm. He argued there was a growing need for it and we could carve out a pretty good niche if we played our cards right. The more he talked, the more the idea began to resonate with me. I had the technical chops and he clearly had the business drive. After weeks of late-night discussions fueled by greasy takeout, I finally caved. "What do I have to lose, really?" I remember saying. Those first couple of years were a grind. We were working insane hours trying to balance our day jobs with building the business on the side. There were nights when I'd literally doze off at my desk. We hit snags at every turn, clients pulling out, budget shortfalls, levels of stress I'd never experienced before, but we kept pushing. Gradually, things started to fall into place. We landed a few substantial contracts, built a solid reputation for getting results, and eventually the business started to take off. By the time I turned 58, I was doing better than I ever had. I wasn't rolling in dough, but I was comfortable. For the first time in my life, I moved out of that cramped apartment and into a modest but cozy house with a small yard, a place I was proud of. I'd even managed to save a little money, something I never thought would be possible after the divorce. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own destiny. I wasn't just surviving, I was finally living. I generally kept to myself, focusing on work and keeping my personal life simple. I started dating again, and then I met Lena. She was a widow. Her husband had died in a car accident a couple of years before. We hit it off almost immediately. She was an amazing woman, and after a year, we got married. We had a beautiful baby girl and named her Sarah. My life was peaceful, and I liked it that way. Then, completely out of the blue, Zach and Emily showed up at my door. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the middle of mowing the lawn when I saw their car pull into the driveway. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I hadn't seen either of them in years, and suddenly there they were, getting out of the car as if nothing had changed. I turned off the mower and walked over, unsure what to expect. "Dad," Emily said, smiling as if we'd spoken yesterday. Zach was right behind her, holding a toddler I assumed was his child. For a fleeting moment, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe they were here to reconnect, to finally bridge the chasm that had grown between us. "It's been too long," Emily said, giving me a quick hug. "Yeah, it has," I replied, still trying to process the situation. We stood there in an awkward silence for a few seconds before Zach cleared his throat. "Mind if we come in?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. They walked inside as if they owned the place, commenting on the house, how nice it was, and how much I'd improved my situation. I didn't sense the underlying motive at that moment. I was too preoccupied with the unexpectedness of their visit. We sat in the living room, and I couldn't help but notice their overly friendly demeanor. Zach inquired about my job, Emily complimented the house, and they both made frequent remarks about how much they'd missed me. Then, after about 20 minutes of polite conversation, the real reason for their visit became clear. "Dad," Zach began, leaning forward slightly. "There's something we need to ask you." "Okay," I replied, still completely unaware of what was coming. He shot a look at Emily, who gave him a little nod of encouragement. Then he just blurted it out. "We're in a tough spot and could really use some financial help." I just stared at them, waiting for him to elaborate. Emily jumped in to fill the silence. "It's not really for us, it's for the kids. Things have been pretty rough lately." It turned out Rick's landscaping business, where they both worked, had tanked. With the money drying up, they were struggling to cover their basic expenses. "So, what exactly are you asking for?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Well," Emily said, "we were hoping you could maybe help us out a bit, just until we can get back on our feet." That little flicker of hope I'd felt earlier, the one that told me they actually missed me, instantly vanished. They hadn't come back to reconnect. They hadn't come back because they missed me or wanted to repair the past. They'd come back because they knew I was doing okay and they wanted a piece of it. "I'll think about it," I said, making sure my face remained neutral. They left soon after, thanking me as if I'd already agreed to give them what they wanted. The moment they were out the door, I sat down and blocked their numbers on my phone. 8 years of silence, and this is why they'd returned. It wasn't about family or about healing old wounds. It was all about money. For years, I'd held onto the hope that we could rebuild our relationship and that they would finally come back. But the truth was that it would never happen. I thought that was the end of it, but I was wrong. They weren't done yet. A week later, they showed up at my office unannounced, completely uninvited. I was in the middle of an important meeting with a client when my assistant knocked on the door, looking flustered. There are 2 people in the lobby who are insisting they need to see you. They don't have an appointment. Tell them to leave their names and I'll get back to them, I said, annoyed at the interruption. She hesitated. They're saying they're your kids. My stomach dropped. Of course, it was Zach and Emily. I told her to ask them to wait, figuring I'd deal with them after I was done with the meeting, but apparently patience wasn't a virtue they possessed. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard raised voices from down the hall. They barged past my assistant and walked straight into the conference room, dragging their kids along with them. Dad, we need to talk, Zach said, completely ignoring the fact that I was in the middle of a meeting with clients and my business partner. I stood up, trying to keep my composure and keep this meeting professional. I'm in the middle of something, I said. This can't wait, Emily said, planting herself at the head of the table as if she owned the place. I glanced at Martin, who looked as confused and uncomfortable as I felt, and then turned back to them. Fine, wait in my office. I'll be there as soon as I'm finished. Zach started to argue, but Emily grabbed his arm and pulled him out, muttering something under her breath. I apologized to the clients, wrapped up the meeting as quickly as possible, and headed towards my office, already dreading what I knew was waiting for me. When I walked in, Zach was pacing back and forth while Emily sat on the couch, bouncing a fussy toddler on her lap. Neither of them looked happy. You've got some nerve, Zach said the moment the door closed behind me. I raised an eyebrow, surprised. Excuse me. Blocking our numbers, ignoring our calls, he snapped. We're your family, Dad. You can't just shut us out like that. Emily sighed, clearly trying to play the role of mediator. Look, we understand, okay? We messed up, but we're trying to make amends. That's why we came here today. No, you're here because I wouldn't just hand over the money, I replied. It's not about the money, Zach said, his voice getting louder. I looked down at the little boy fidgeting in Emily's lap, a complete stranger to me. I didn't even know his name. Years, a whole chunk of their lives, had passed without a word, without even a picture. Now suddenly I was supposed to melt into the role of doting grandpa. I haven't even met him, I said, struggling to keep my voice even. You cut me out of everything for years, and now you bring them here, like props in some guilt trip you've cooked up? That's pretty damn low. Zach's face flushed crimson. I can't believe you're saying that. Are you even listening to yourself? You're still punishing us for one mistake, and the only ones who suffer are those kids. The kids you kept me from for 8 years? I shot back, the words sharper than I intended. The toddler started to cry, probably picking up on the tension, and Emily bounced him on her knee, trying to soothe him. Can we just calm down, please? She asked, her voice tight. But Zach wasn't calming down, he was getting angrier. You're acting like a bitter old man, he spat out. Do you even care about anyone besides yourself? That did it. Something inside me just snapped. I stood up, straightened my shoulders, and pointed towards the door. Get out. Now. Zach looked like he was about to argue, to escalate things further, but Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him back. Let's go, she said, her voice strained, her face pale. They left, but not before Zach turned back, a sneer twisting his face. You're going to regret this when you're old and alone, he hissed. Don't come crawling back to us. The door slammed shut and I stood there, my hands shaking, the anger coursing through me. A tiny part of me, I guess, had been holding on to some hope that they actually wanted to reconnect. But it was gone now. They didn't want a relationship. They wanted something from me. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, but my mind kept replaying the scene, the audacity of them just showing up like that, acting like I owed them something. It was almost laughable. A few days later, things escalated. I got an email. The subject line, let's start fresh. I opened it more out of morbid curiosity than anything else. It was a long, drawn-out apology. They admitted they'd messed up, said they regretted shutting me out, and claimed they wanted to make things right. But buried halfway through the email was the real reason for their sudden change of heart. We've been working on a new business idea, it said. It would mean the world to us if you could invest in it. We're not asking for a handout, just a little help to get started. I didn't even finish reading it. I slammed the laptop shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence, and just stared at the opposite wall, trying to control my temper. They hadn't changed. They didn't care about reconnecting, they didn't care about me. All they wanted was my money. I didn't respond. This time, I didn't even pretend to consider it. I was done. The decision was made. I was cutting them off completely. After all the demands, after all the manipulation, it was clear Zach and Emily had zero interest in fixing anything. They just wanted what I could give them. I blocked their numbers on my phone, unfriended them from every social media platform, and even changed my email address. I wasn't going to leave any door open for them to use me again. At first, I felt a sharp stab of guilt, like a knife twisting in my gut. Cutting off my own kids felt drastic, but it wasn't like they'd left me with much of a choice. For 8 years, they had no problem keeping me out of their lives. Now, they could stay out of mine. It wasn't easy. There were times when I questioned myself. What kind of father cuts off his kids? But every time I even thought about letting them back in, I remembered how they treated me, not just recently, but for years. The silent birthdays. The weddings I wasn't invited to. The way they only came around when they needed something. They didn't want a father, just a provider. So, I moved on. I buried myself in my work, picked up a few new hobbies, woodworking, mostly, and even started doing some traveling. Weekend trips to the coast, that sort of thing. I'd finally accepted that the family I'd envisioned wasn't ever going to materialize. In a weird way, it was liberating, letting go of that expectation. Then, out of the blue, Carly showed up. It was a Saturday morning, sunlight filtering through the kitchen window while I was finishing my coffee when I heard a knock. I opened the door and there she was. My ex-wife, looking different. The confident, almost arrogant woman who'd left me for Rick was gone. This Carly looked older, weathered, beaten down. Her clothes were faded and there was a look of desperation in her eyes that I'd never seen before, not even when we were struggling financially in the early years. "Carly," I said, my voice flat, surprised at how little I felt. "What do you want?" She hesitated, shifted her weight from one foot to the other. "Can I come in?" "No," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest. "Just tell me what you need to say." She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the porch floor. "Rick's gone," she said, her voice barely audible. "His business failed. He left." I raised an eyebrow, trying to absorb what she was telling me. "Left as in, disappeared?" She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "He drained everything we had and just vanished. I have nothing left. Nowhere to go." I didn't know who else to turn to. Leaning against the doorframe, I tried to process the situation. The man she'd left me for, the man who was supposed to give her the lavish life she craved, had bankrupted her and run. "What are you hoping to get from me exactly, Carly?" I asked, keeping my tone even, betraying none of my inner turmoil. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice cracking with emotion. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. I was selfish, I was stupid. I see that now. I threw away the best thing I ever had for someone who didn't give a damn about me." Her words hung heavy in the air, but they didn't sting the way they would have years ago. I didn't feel anger or even a sense of vindication. Just emptiness. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "but it really doesn't change anything. You made your choice, Carly. You walked away and now you're dealing with the consequences. That's not my responsibility anymore." Tears streamed down her face, but I didn't flinch. I'd spent too long being a doormat for other people and I wasn't about to let her back into my life simply because she was desperate. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I needed you to know. I needed you to know how sorry I am." I nodded once, stepping back into the house. "I hope you get things sorted out, Carly, but this is where it ends." And with that, I closed the door. Afterwards, I sat in my quiet living room, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within me. It wasn't satisfaction, certainly not triumph. More like closure. Finally, I felt like I could truly let go of it all, the marriage, the betrayal, the years of hurt. It was all behind me now. The last several months have been about rebuilding myself, my wife, my work, my hobbies, and reclaiming my inner peace. I don't dwell on the past anymore. As for Carly, her apology didn't rewrite history, but it was the final nudge I needed to move forward with my life. I've come to terms with the fact that my life isn't what I'd once pictured, but it's mine.